It was an ordinary morning on Morning Joe, the popular political talk show, where the hosts often sparred with their guests. But today was different. As the camera zoomed in on Karoline Leavitt, the young conservative firebrand, the usual friendly banter between the hosts and their guests gave way to a tense silence. Joe Scarborough, the show's outspoken host, leaned forward with a smirk, his voice dripping with condescension. "You really think your side has the answers, Karoline?" he asked, his tone cutting. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're out of your depth." Most guests would have flinched, perhaps stammered, or even tried to navigate the jabs with a smile. But not Karoline. With a calm that sent a chill through the studio, she met his gaze, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "Joe," she replied, her voice steady but fierce, "you underestimate me." What happened next left everyone in the studio, and the millions watching at home, in complete shock. The studio went silent, the tension thick in the air. Joe's smirk faltered for just a moment, but it was enough to notice. He had expected Karoline to shrink back, to backpedal, but instead, she stood her ground, her posture unyielding, as if she was daring him to throw another punch. "Is that so?" Joe raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. His usual confidence was starting to slip, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. The audience could feel it, the shift in power dynamics, but he wasn't about to let it go. "So, what is it exactly that you think you have to say that'll change my mind?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I don't need to change your mind, Joe. I just need to make you realize something." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "Your narrative is falling apart. The things you believe are the truths you tell your viewers, well, they're not the truth. They're your version of it, and people are waking up." The camera zoomed in as her voice grew more forceful, more direct. "I'm not some talking head you can push around. I'm a young woman who has a mind of her own, and I'm not afraid to speak it. The truth is, the people you mock and dismiss, the ones you've been pushing to the margins, they're listening to people like me now, and they're not buying what you're selling anymore." The studio erupted in nervous laughter from some of the crew, but there was a sense of tension in the air that everyone could feel. Joe's eyes narrowed, his face turning a shade of red as he leaned forward again, trying to regain control. But Karoline wasn't done. "I didn't come here to play your game, Joe," she continued, her words ringing with a quiet power. "I came here to tell you that the world is changing, and you're not going to be able to stop it by bullying people like me." Joe's jaw tightened, but he wasn't about to back down either. "So, you're suggesting? What exactly? That your way is the only way?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I'm suggesting you should start listening. For once, listen. Because you might just hear something that actually changes your mind." The silence that followed was deafening. Joe opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. His grip on the desk tightened as he stared at her, visibly struggling to regain his footing in this unexpected clash of ideologies. The camera zoomed out as Karoline's words hung in the air, and the audience, now on the edge of their seats, waited to see if Joe would respond or if something bigger was about to unfold on live television. Joe's gaze flicked to his co-hosts, as if seeking support, but they were just as stunned as the viewers at home. For a moment, the only sound in the studio was the hum of the camera equipment and the occasional shuffle of papers. The tension in the room was palpable. Joe, never one to back down from a challenge, opened his mouth to respond, but his words caught in his throat. Instead, he shifted in his seat and chuckled, trying to regain some semblance of his usual bravado. "All right, Karoline," he said, his voice now forced with a touch of sarcasm. "Let's hear it then. What's your solution? What's this so-called truth you're selling?" Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes still locked on him, as though she could see straight through his thin veil of mockery. "You really want to know?" she asked, her voice steady, but with an edge that cut through the tension like a knife. Joe nodded slowly, clearly caught off guard by her confidence. "I'm not here to sell anything," she said, her tone unwavering. "I'm here to speak about what's really happening in this country. People are tired of the same old script, tired of the division, the fear-mongering. They want real change, and they're not getting it from you, Joe. They're not getting it from the media or from the politicians who've been sitting comfortably for years." Joe's eyes flickered for a second, a hint of unease creeping into his expression. This wasn't just a young woman challenging him. This was someone who was speaking directly to the heart of the discontent brewing across the country. It was a challenge that hit much deeper than a political debate. "Let me tell you something," Karoline continued, her voice rising slightly as her passion grew. "People are done being told what to think. They're done with being silenced. You call it fake news when you don't agree with it, but all that does is push people further away. They see through it. They know exactly what's going on. And they're going to start demanding more than just the same tired narrative you keep pushing. For a moment, the studio was dead quiet. Jo sat there, blinking, as if trying to process her words. Then, just as quickly as the silence had fallen, a voice from the control room broke through the stillness. Morning Joe was back from a commercial break in 5 seconds. The producers scrambled, the camera angles shifted, and the chaos of live television resumed. But Karoline wasn't fazed. She sat back in her chair, unfazed, as if she had just delivered a truth that couldn't be undone by a simple commercial break. Joe's face had gone pale. He quickly regained his composure and turned to the camera with a forced smile. Well, folks, I guess you've heard it. Karoline Leavitt bringing a little heat to the table today. We'll be back after the break to hear more from her. Stay with us. As the show cut to a commercial, the air in the studio was electric. The producers were in a frenzy, whispering quickly into their headsets. But Karoline remained calm. She wasn't here to play games. She was here to make a statement, and she had made it loud and clear. Once the commercial ended and the show resumed, Joe struggled to keep the conversation going. He threw a couple of lighthearted questions her way, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was obvious to everyone watching that he was no longer in charge of the conversation. And Karoline? She was just getting started. As the show continued, the atmosphere had shifted. Karoline's words had already planted seeds of doubt in the minds of many. The questions from Joe became more guarded, his usual sharp retorts now tempered with hesitation. Karoline, on the other hand, had found her stride, her voice clear and confident as she continued to speak on the issues that mattered to her, issues that resonated with the millions of viewers watching. The minutes ticked by, and it was clear that Joe was losing ground. He tried to bring the conversation back to a safe, political debate, but Karoline wouldn't let him. She refused to be drawn into the same tired arguments. Instead, she dug deeper, pulling back the layers of the conversation to reveal the raw truths people were afraid to acknowledge. "Joe," she said calmly, turning the focus back onto him as the final segment approached. "You've spent years telling people what they should think, what they should feel. But what if it's time to actually listen, to hear what people are really saying beyond the headlines and the sound bites?" Joe's hand rested uneasily on the desk. The edge in his voice was gone now, replaced by something softer, almost reflective. "And what exactly are they saying, Karoline?" Karoline smiled, her voice quiet but firm, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "They're saying they're tired. They're tired of the lies, the division, the constant narrative that only serves the powerful. They're saying they want something different. They want to be heard, not told what to think." For a long moment, Joe didn't speak. The cameras lingered on him, waiting for his usual response. But he didn't have one. Karoline had turned the tables, and in a way that nobody, not even Joe himself, had expected. Finally, as the show neared its end, Joe cleared his throat. The bravado was gone. "Well, folks," he said with a tight smile, "it's been an interesting conversation today. Karoline Leavitt, thank you for joining us." Karoline nodded, her expression calm, but there was a spark in her eyes. "Thanks for having me, Joe." The cameras rolled as the show ended, and the crew quickly began wrapping up. As the lights dimmed, the whispers started. The tension that had filled the air only minutes before was now being replaced by a ripple of disbelief. No one had expected Karoline to leave an imprint like this. Joe Scarborough, the veteran host who had often been untouchable, had been outmaneuvered, and the world was watching. As Karoline walked off the set, the backstage staff exchanged glances, clearly still processing the events that had unfolded before them. She wasn't just another guest. She was someone who had taken on a giant and won. And the ripple effect would be felt far beyond that one show. For Karoline, though, this was just the beginning.